This is the 65th class. And like we said, that there's a process to confidence. There's a process to bringing out our capacity to change reality, or as we've been calling it, to reveal the inherent goodness in reality based on the way that we see it. And excuse me for muting everybody. Just make sure everybody's muted. Okay. So the process is, like we said, that the confidence, it pushes forward a process that has 4 stages to it, which are faith, will, mind, and sight. And we said last time that once our picture, our vision of what we would like reality to reveal is crystal clear, there are no more doubts in it. There are no more cloudy areas, foggy areas. Then a natural outgrowth out of that clarification is the growth of will. The clearer our vision is, the stronger the will becomes. So let's see this, how it's written. Once faith is clarified in this manner, it leads to determination of will. Determination that one's vision of faith will be fulfilled in reality. And it's very interesting the way that the word will is used in English. So I added the word will here. Will be fulfilled. We use the word will in English to designate a future event. But really, it's more than that. Will is tapping into the future, which we saw in our vision, and it's like a conduit that allows the future to flow into the present. And you have to picture this. Picture that the future is really a reservoir of goodness. And to bring that goodness into the present, we have to use our will. Don't think about will as a force that fashions reality, that carves reality, that one might say even like what a sculptor would do. We're not sculpting reality. Rather, we're infusing it with the goodness that is inherently in the future, waiting to be brought into the present. Now, I used some very, I would say, convoluted language in that last sentence because I'm trying to get something across, which I'll try to now break up and say in a number of sentences. The future is really just a layer in the reality that we are in. You know, archaeologists, they're used to going deeper into the earth in order to uncover what they consider to be the past. So, as they unearth the dirt, let's say they're excavating some ancient ruins, the further down they go, the further back they're going. the same idea exists psychologically. It's as if when you talk to somebody and you uncover their essence, somehow...
Excuse me, does someone have their mute not off? Because I keep hearing wind.
I can't... Mina Lea just came in, but she's not connected yet. So I don't know.
Okay,
everybody seems to be muted except for me. I hope I'm not muted.
Okay, sorry. As long as I already interrupted, the word you used, sculpted.
Yeah.
You said it's not like sculpted, and I wanted to know exactly what.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is we're infusing. Sculpting is like chipping away and trying to change the nature. There are sculptors who used to say that we're just uncovering the essence. But here it's more like, as we'll see, it's more like bringing the future into the present is not like sculpting the present in the sense of forcing it to look a certain way, but rather trying to reveal what's anyway in the present. And that's what I'm trying to get at now. So let me go back to this image of archaeology, that as you talk about your deeper essence, we're talking about psychological archaeology. It's as if as you're talking about your deeper essence, a lot of people think that they're going backwards in time, meaning that they're going to search for their long-lost self. The picture that people have is something like, when I was 10, that was the happiest time of my life, and therefore that must have been the core of my identity. The core of my identity was formed then, and since then I've been suffering and going through all kinds of difficulties, and so whenever I'm able to go back to that early stage, that's when I meet my true, happy, effortless essence, my real soul root. That's the way that it's usually thought of. What we're trying to say is different. That your real essence is indeed underneath, but it's really sort of like underneath you, above you. It sounds a little convoluted again. I'm trying to get out of my convolution and try to say it the right way. As you dig deeper, you're not going backwards in time, although that's how we associate it in our minds. But really, a human being has to think of themselves as being uncovered as time goes by. Meaning, the older I become, the more I've chipped away at the facade of who I am, and the more I have a chance of coming to my true essence. My true essence lies in the future, not in the past. But you have to understand that the reason that we associate the true essence with the past is because we have this feeling that the past has already happened, and therefore we can access that. And we'd like to be able to access our true essence. But in fact, the past and the future are just as accessible. They're just as accessible. And our real essence is actually in the future, except, again, I think this is something that we do to ourselves because we want to convince ourselves that we can access our true essence. So we sort of tell ourselves, well, since I can only access the past, let me try to go backwards in time to find myself. And then we get this picture that who we really are is what we were when we were young. And that somehow that was the pure, unadulterated, unhurt, optimistic, real version of who we are. But what this is going to try to convince us is that the true essence, as everybody knows, is not who I was when I was 10 years old. When I was 10 years old, very little of my true essence could be expressed, if only for the fact that I was still immature, that I still didn't know enough about myself. I didn't know what my real issues are. I didn't know what I was really here in the world for. The older you get, the more you understand what these things are and the more you can express them. And so your true essence is actually further into the future. How can we access it? How can we access the future? So instead of digging into the past, it's like we're digging into the future. And what accesses and what digs into the future is our power of will. The axis painting the future is what's done in faith. That's where we envision the goodness that we would like to reveal in the world. But to actually get there, we have to use willpower. Willpower is like the shovel that you use in order to excavate not the past but the future. And this is a really important point. If you don't exercise willpower, so you may have a vision of what the future is like or what you would like it to be like, but you haven't yet been able to access it in the sense of actually use it, make it work for you. For that you need willpower. And like I said, it's very interesting that in English, the word will doesn't only mean ratzon, like in Hebrew. Ratzon means willpower. You also use it in the future sense. I will go. So you have this, again, I haven't analyzed it yet grammatically why it is this way in English, but it's a beautiful analogy that when I want to access the future, when I want to go there, I need to use will as a verb. And this is really what we're talking about. The willpower becomes the verb that allows us to access the future. That's the power that we have in order to excavate reality to uncover the future. In that sense, it's a little bit like sculpting at the highest level, which is just chipping away to reveal what's underneath, as it were. So, really, there's a lot of effort involved, but it's not effort that has come to coerce our reality. It's not forcing, it's not constraining our reality. Rather, it's allowing it to break free. Here's a thought experiment. Scientists today look at the cosmos to figure out what was. What they think today is that the light that we see coming to us from space, from the heavens, took a long, long time to come to us. So, for instance, if we look at certain parts of the galaxy, not the galaxy, the sky, we see galaxies that are 10 billion years old. We look at other places, we see things that are 11 billion years old, 12 billion, 13 billion. But then there's certain things that we can't see because we see this cloud of radiation called the cosmic background radiation. We can't see past that. What if what we're looking at is not the past, but the future? What if what we're looking at when we look out into space is not what has already happened, but rather what will be? Why am I saying this? Because if you remember, last time, the time before, or a few times ago, we talked about the tremendous transformation that Avram Avinu went through in looking at the stars. In the beginning, he thought that the stars were determining his future. So the stars were, as it were, in the past, influencing him in the present, forcing his future to look a certain way. So again, the stars were an omen from the past, forcing Avraham to be as he was, sterile, and unable to have children. But when God took him above the stars, as it were, God shifted his point of view so that instead of when he looks at the sky, he would see the past influencing his present, he saw the stars as his future. As God said to him then, that's what he heard then when he looked at the stars from this new point of view. Your seed, meaning your offspring, will be as numerous as the stars. So the stars, instead of telling him about the past, forcing his present, determining his present, suddenly became his future. This is an amazing thought. What causes the change? Willpower. And the willpower is not even something that a person just has to, let's call it, muster. It's the direct result of trying to envision the future. The willpower that has the will that has the power to excavate the future, to dig up the future. Again, you have to change your outlook on where the future is. That we think that the future is somehow not here, but the past is, because that's what you do when you dig, like an archaeologist. But maybe, not maybe, I'm proposing that this is how Torah wants us to see this. The future is what you dig up. The future is here. It's just covered. What is it covered by? It's covered by our doubts, by our weaknesses, by our inability to serve God. All these things cover up the future, because the future is just simply the revelation of the goodness inherent in reality. It's already here. This is a very different picture of history than the picture that people have, for instance, when they think about how technology is going to change our lives. When you think about how technology is going to change our lives, so you say, well, 100 years ago there were no automobiles. And since the 1920s, when automobiles became a staple of human life, look at how our lives have changed. So if I want to think about how technology is going to continue to change our lives, so I have to imagine what comes after the automobile. Is it an autonomous car? Is it this? Is it that? Whatever it is. But until we don't develop that piece of technology, we won't advance. We won't go forward. This picture of reality that we're now discussing is saying, no, the progress is not about development. Progress is about uncovering what is already here. It's not technology that's going to move us forward. Rather, it's our willpower that unearths the future. And one of the results of unearthing the future is that new technology is also discovered. That's also true. But where it really comes from, the source of it all, is the human willpower. And the more willpower is found and used, the more the future is revealed. Again, we associate, at least I as a person living in the 21st century, I associate change and the promise of the future as related to developing certain technologies. But the Torah is telling me that technologies being developed is just a side effect of willpower being used. And the real willpower is something that comes from faith. The classic example of this is the Baal Shem Tov's, all the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. It's well known that many of the spiritual sages of the past 200 generations have said that the fact that we could come back to the land of Israel in the last 150 years is a direct result of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. Why? Because what you could say runs as a thread through them all is the notion that the Torah is not something that was relevant in the past, but it's something that's relevant in the present and in the future. And the way he used to say it is that anything that we learn, like for instance, we learn about the Ben Sorer Umoreh in this week's Parsha, or we learn about the captive woman. Whatever we learn about, even though it's a mitzvah that seemingly we can't do, we have no way of enacting this mitzvah now, because the conditions are wrong. That mitzvah still has to be relevant in this moment, because all the mitzvot are timeless. They're true at any given moment for any given person, regardless of whether he's living in the time of the temple, he's living in the 15th century, or he's living today, or he's going to be living in 1,000 years. The mitzvot are really conduits of, if you want it, the will of God, which is above time. It's a way to access God's will. The moment that you understand that, then the mitzvah is always relevant, because you always want to access God's will. Because when you access His will and you follow it, you're bringing and you're using will to change time, to move time, to develop the world. So they used to say that the fact that the Baal Shem Tov was able to teach us, nobody said this before him, at least as far as I know, that all the mitzvot are just as relevant at any point in time and for any given person. That allowed changes in the future. That willpower, that accessing God's willpower through the mitzvos and performing them, right? Performing them, then we can't perform them, but understanding their spiritual manner of being performed, that itself moved us forward. And so instead of being in a state in which we all live in Chutz La'aretz, we all live outside the land of Israel in physical exile, that allowed us to come back to the land of Israel, to at least begin to live the future. There's a lot more to go. How will that be revealed, the rest of the future? The more we access this willpower. So, again, I hope I'm capturing the idea here that the future is not something in the future. It's not something that's far away. It's something that you would say is deep down or deep up. I can't really capture it in words. But if the past is something that I would associate with being below, then the future is something that I associate as being above. This is a very big topic in the Book of Formation that we're not going to get into right now, but it's called that there are 10 different extremes or depth like depth in plural, which is a hard word for me to say at least, 10 different depths. And the ones that are related to what we're talking about are called the depth of the beginning and the depth of the end. And they're depths, meaning that depth of the end is obviously the future, depth of the beginning is the past. To get to the depth of the end, I have to dig. It's a depth. It's like it's hiding behind something, it's concealed. And the shovel that digs that up is the willpower. So you're not really coercing reality and forcing it to move into the future. Rather, you're uncovering the future that's here, where you are right now. You're using the willpower that you have to uncover the future. So you're now determining the future without coercing it. And more importantly, the past is not determining your present. Like by Avraham, the way that the stars are is not determining your present. Rather, you become free from determinism. Determinism means that the present moment is the sum total of everything that happened in the past. You're really gaining freedom, like we said about Avraham, that from the moment that he was able to see the future, he became free of the determinism of the past that coerced him to be sterile and not to be able to have a child. That's that's why in the end we call it freedom of will. Because, first of all, because freedom comes because of will. Because will has this power, this ability to free our choices so that they're not determined by the past. And really the way that it gives us freedom is because we are able to determine the future. We're able to determine that this is what will happen in the future. Again, based on our vision of faith. Let me give a very concrete example. A person wants to start a company doing something. He wants to produce some kind of device. The classic picture is that you will either be successful or fail based on how good your plan is. If you make a good plan, you should be able to bring things together in reality in such a way that your plan will be successful. And you've got to take a lot of things into account. For instance, if you've got a supply chain, you need these materials, those materials, all these things have to come together at the right time. You can manufacture it, you can sell it, and so on. The picture that we're painting is that's the cover story. That's not really what's happening. The plan is important, but here's a news break or a news flash. Plans don't succeed or fail because of how good they were. Plans succeed or fail because of how much willpower was put into them. And I'll explain. There are always issues that you cannot foresee. Always. There is no foolproof plan in any area because we can't see the future. We can't see all the details. So what makes a plan successful? The amount of willpower that was invested in carrying out that plan. The more willpower there is, the more the picture of the future that was seen in the plan is brought into the foreground. It's like excavated from above and is made to happen in reality, made to be revealed in reality. This will tie in very strongly to the mind stage, the third stage that we'll come to in a moment. Or maybe not today, but we'll come to it soon enough. The willpower is not, it doesn't just stand by itself. It's not just hacking through the problems. The willpower is, first of all, not giving in. Even if the problems seem to be insurmountable. What does it look like when a person doesn't give in? Sometimes it looks ridiculous. A person who's unwilling to give in sometimes seems to be a buffoon. Small example. We say every morning and every evening we go, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, God is one, God is our God, Havaya is our God, God is one. We do that, and we pretty much look like idiots. What are you telling me? That because I'm going to cover my eyes and ignore reality, so now God is one? Look at reality. There's all this plurality in reality. How can you say that God is one? But that's exercising will. Will says that even if I'm unable yet to achieve my goal, which is to reveal that God is one, I still continue doing, acting, going through my plan. In a certain sense, the fact that we perform all the mitzvahs that we do is the biggest demonstration of willpower that ever was. Because what we're saying is that in spite of the fact that our plan hasn't worked yet, our plan to reveal that God is one and so on, we continue to go to the office every day as if we have a company to run already. As if this already exists. Why? Because if I truly believe that what I have is a vision of the future, that's where the faith started. If I truly have such a vision and true faith in it, then the fact that it hasn't yet been revealed is not because the vision is wrong, but because I haven't put enough willpower into it. I need more willpower. That's what's keeping the future from revealing itself. That's how the will here is tied into the faith. And that if you really believe in your vision, you will continue to pursue it with unabating enthusiasm and motivation. Said another way, with willpower. The willpower is excavating the future out of the present. The willpower is the shovel with which we're unearthing the future. This is true in our religion, and it's also true in life. I quoted this already before in one of the classes. Churchill's saying that success is being able to go from failure to failure with no diminishment of enthusiasm. With our enthusiasm continuing to be just as strong as it was before we failed. Why? Because that enthusiasm is success itself. Because that's what's uncovering the future. That motivation, that willpower. There are things that will take more than the enthusiasm and motivation and willpower of one individual. There are things that require a lot of people with their great amount of willpower. Winning World War II, for instance, depended on there being somebody who could paint the picture of the future and make people believe in it and get them to do something about it and exercise their willpower. It wasn't one person or two people or 10 people. It was millions and millions. And so who was a leader in that time? A person who could share that vision. And that's why Churchill, for instance, or FDR, were men that were able to paint a picture and share it in words. What do we have today? We have leaders who have no vision, So obviously they have no words. They don't motivate anybody to do anything. They're busy with themselves, either aggrandizing themselves or escaping from the authorities, or whatever they're doing, each one with his pack of problems. But there's very few words of vision being shared. And words of vision change reality because they create willpower. My favorite story in the whole world about this, just so that you know what an impact this has, is something that I heard from a rabbi I used to learn with. And he knew this person personally. His name was Shimon Peres. He was a famous politician in Eretz Yisrael. And Shimon Peres, as anybody knows, was not a man of philosophy. He was not a man of thought. He had very little thought. He's not somebody who would be able to struggle with ideas and build a world view from them. He's not that type of person. He was a very hands-on person. He was a very hard-working bulldozer, in a certain sense, of a man who could move things. But he had no vision. And yet, everybody who knows Shimon Peres would say, what are you talking about? He's the guy who invented Oslo. He's the guy who invented his vision of the new Middle East. He didn't invent it. He received it. Who gave it to him? So, at the time he told me the name of the old philosopher or thinker of the left that Shimon Peres used to spend days upon days walking with on the Carmel Mountain, discussing these things and hearing from this visionary how he saw the future of the state of Israel. Shimon Peres had no ability to paint that picture by himself. But he took it. He adopted it. It became his own. The beauty of it was that here you have two people, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who the visionary was. Probably not too hard to find if you see his if he wrote a memoir, I'm not sure. But here you have a tag team with one person painting the vision and the other person picking it up and developing the willpower in himself. Meaning, it's not always something that happens all within the same individual. Sometimes it's a process that can span a number of people. So, for our own things, sometimes, let's take obviously a very different example. The Rebbe was a person who had a vision. And he shared that vision. Strangely enough, the Rebbe did exactly this. He took visions from the past and he churned them into visions of the future. The Rebbe built on the fact that we have a long history of Torah. And he took from the Torah what he wanted as the framework or the building blocks from which he built his vision. But as opposed to people who reminisce and are nostalgic about the wonderful past, the Rebbe always took the past and he said, no, this is not the past. This is actually the future. He was able to invigorate people, to motivate them to see it the same way that he saw it. He gave them the vision. It's exactly the same thing as we talked about in the beginning of the class. He was able to take the picture of the stars as determining the present because the stars are from the past, and churn them into the vision of the future. And make people motivated to attain that future. That's a tremendous thing. So the Rebbe didn't do it by himself. He took the vision part, but because it was so clear in his mind, it awakened will in other people. The more you read him, the more your will awakens. Because that's what faith does. And, Rabbi Miller wrote a book called Turning Judaism Outwards. I didn't read the book. I simply don't have it. I love the title. But I think that the better essence, the better way to capture the essence of what the Rebbe did was that he didn't turn Judaism outwards. He turned it from something from the past into something in the future. So he invigorated Judaism by making the past into the future. That was the main thing. And once that happened, then people who were moved by this shift became motivated to churn Judaism outwards, to say we have something to offer the world. Because really what that means is we have something in us that can determine the future, that can reveal the future. That was the great shift that occurred. So let's read a little bit more. In truth, one's vision of faith already exists in the inner dimension of reality. That's what we just explained. It's already here. If you have a real vision of faith, you're seeing a vision of the future. And a vision of the future is really here. That future already exists. It just needs to be uncovered. And confidence, which we said is the fuel of this whole process, transforms it from being a state of concealment without being, which is what we call He'elem she'eino b'mtziut, to concealment with being, He'elem she'yeshno b'mtziut. And if you remember, we saw this many weeks back, that the Friediger Rebbe once said that what the Baal Shem Tov came to do was to give reality, to give being to faith. To churn the faith from something that's concealment without being to being something that's concealed with being. It's right here in front of you. The best example in Chassidus is like we usually use, is that a flint stone has fire in it in a state of concealment without being, because there's nothing hot inside the stone. But concealment with being is an ember that all you need to do is blow on a little. The heat is inside. You just have to bring it out. Confidence brings the will to a state in which it demands that the vision be fulfilled in practice immediately. Why? Because it's here. What's stopping it? Similar to the statement, we want Mashiach now. Why the now? We want Mashiach. Because if it's not now, you're still talking about something that is concealment without being. That has no being yet. Nobody says, I want to give birth now when she's not pregnant. Nobody says something like that. Doesn't make any sense. But from the moment that you're pregnant, you can begin feeling that. because there's already some being here. It's ready, not ready, those are different questions. But you can feel the will that I want to give birth already. This brings us to such an important aspect that we've talked about in the past, that when the vision has received being, it's become concrete. When the vision is clear enough, will follows naturally, and it intensifies from itself. It feeds itself. You don't need to muster willpower. Willpower becomes the expression of the vision of faith. That's what happens in this. Women can understand better than men in most cases, because it's the same thing. The fetus is not ready or not ready based on some natural process. The fetus becomes ready to be born the clearer the vision that the mother has becomes. And that in turn causes willpower to bring this out into the world. The vision that you have is what affects the fetus more than anything in preparing it to be born. So it's true.
Rabbi?
Yeah?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I don't really get this example. I feel like having a baby is completely
natural,
out of our control. So I don't get this. I don't understand this example. I don't see that it has anything to do with my willpower.
Right. That's the way that most people feel about the redemption also. It's just a natural process. It has nothing to do with our willpower. That's the way most people see this.
Okay.
But the prophets keep telling us that the redemption is like childbirth. They keep using the same image. So either the image is wrong, and why did they use this image? Or we're missing something about pregnancy. We don't get something very basic about it. The fact that we think that it's a natural process, or like especially if you live in Israel and with the Zionist vision, which is no vision at all, but it's at least the one thing you can say about it is that it wants a natural development. So if you ascribe to that, then you can't imagine for a moment that you would have any influence on what's going on. It just seems like, well, this is what happens every day in the world, 150,000 times. It's got nothing to do with me. This is how nature works. But that would be like saying, really, that an iPhone is the product of the Sahara sitting there for a long enough time. That's not true. The iPhone was created because people had visions, because people had willpower because of those visions, because they did something about it. So what are you telling me? That the iPhone is more complex than a child? That's not true. It's true that God is part of this process of childbirth in such a way that his or your contribution is concealed even from yourself. But you're contributing all the time, whether you know it, are aware of it or not. So again, there's a picture of redemption that people have by mistake, that somehow this is some kind of natural event. You don't have to do anything. It'll come when it comes, and that's it. But that's not what's really going on. And that's what I'm trying to convince you. That the future is not just coming. Because the future can come much more quickly, much more readily, and much more advanced than the future that we're following when we don't express and use our power of will. In fact,
then I think the word willpower then is a misnomer, because I hear a lot of people that say, oh, I don't have the willpower to do something. Like they look at the word willpower as being a big strain and sticking to something in a way they can't do it. And so maybe this word willpower we're not understanding.
That's why I tried to say that, willpower is a shovel that uncovers the future. That's not exactly what most people mean when they say willpower. They think about it as energy. And here we're saying that the energy really is confidence. And the willpower is what we call, in Hebrew there's an interesting permutation of the word will. Will is ratzon. And if I take the letters and I permute them, so one of the most well-known permutations in all of Kabbalah is that ratzon is tzinor. Tzinor means a conduit, a pipe. You have to think about willpower as not the expending of the energy, because that's not all it is. It's much more than that. It's the conduit that's connecting the present with the future. I gave an example of saying Shema. Do you need willpower to say Shema? It's a very easy thing to do. You cover your eyes and you say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. You're done. How much willpower can that require? Turns out that it requires a ton. Why? Because it's not the act of moving my lips. It's not the act of covering my eyes. Those are side effects, call it. The real act that I'm doing is I'm ascribing, I'm motivated by the vision. What's the vision? The vision is that God will eventually be one, recognized by all people. That's where the willpower is. I need willpower to ascribe to that vision, but as it turns out, the willpower is something that comes out of the vision. I don't even have to invent it. I don't even have to get it from somewhere. All I need to do is really ascribe to the vision, and the willpower flows from it. To say it another way, going to childbirth, if I don't have a picture, a vision of my family, then the whole process is just the natural process, and that's sort of like covering the eyes and muttering the words. But I'm not building. The sages want to say, the prophets want to say that in the future, Isaiah says this, a woman will become pregnant and give birth on the same day, after 9 hours. What's the idea? Well, one way of treating this is to say, it's a mashal, it's a parable. This is never going to happen in reality. It's just a way of saying, look, willpower will be so powerful that processes that used to take 9 months will take 9 hours. Okay. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that because our use of willpower changes, reality also changes. I can't force somebody to see it this way. I'm just saying that this is how Chassidus sees it. That you can remain if you want in the natural world and use willpower only, like you said, as a force. And either you have it or you don't have it. Either you're able to muster it or you're not able to muster it. Either you're pregnant or you're not pregnant. Or you can begin to see willpower as the result of something earlier called vision of faith. And that creates willpower that not only helps you achieve your goals, it doesn't really achieve them, it rather reveals them. It makes them into a reality. Because your goals, the real goals that you have, your real mission in life, already exists. It just needs to be uncovered. That uncovering process is what willpower does. So obviously we're going to need more time to explain this. And let me read the next sentence, because this is where you might find more of what you're looking for. It is explained in Chassidut that there is no part of the psyche more powerful than will, and therefore nothing can stand in the way of will, not even the present, not even reality. Indeed, if a person would truly will so, he could change his present essence completely. For everything was created based on its will, which here we're using another word called tzivyon, which is basically like saying its color. Based on the way it perceived itself, and so it is now. That before God created everything that He created, He asked everything that was created, what is your will? Meaning, how do you see yourself? And then He created them. Does it mean that He created them in their final form? On the contrary. Most of the things that God created, in the sense that we see it, is something that has to go through a process to get to the final form. But from God's perspective, it's already in that final form. It's already in its revealed essence. That essence is something we need to strive for. But when God created everything, He created everything at once. Everything was already in its final form. It's we who go through the process. But if you can think of will as connecting with your essence, then you begin to understand that will is not energy. It's not something you need to collect from somewhere. It's your very essence. It's the very essence of your being. What did I see today? I love to look at lists of the most important books. I don't know why I like these things so much. So, so what book did I see today? So I was very surprised when I saw this list. There's Google runs some kind of, not Google, Amazon. There's something called Goodreads. So they have a lot of different lists of books that people say this is good to read, this and so on and so forth. So if you look at the most important, most influential books ever written, so you'll come into a number of different lists, and one of them is I don't know who wrote this. Number 46 he put in there. Probably the most read book by Jewish philosophers, and it's by Schopenhauer, and it's called "The World as Will and Idea," or "The World as Will and Representation." Right? Again, we don't put will as the most important thing. We put faith as even higher. But to begin to understand will, I'm not going to do it justice by just describing it here. I'll try to describe as much as I can. But in a certain sense, you have to see how people from the outside of Yiddishkeit, how they grasp this concept of will. Not just as an energy form that we expend, not just as some, but rather as what the world is itself. And Schopenhauer hit upon this in a certain sense, that the saying of the sages, that the world was created based on its will, on what it, you say, wanted to be. Will is like want. We call it what I want to be, because we don't see the end, because the end is in the future for us. But when everything was created, again, take away time for a moment, try to take it away, and go beyond the process. And you'll see that what you will is yourself. What you want the most is to be yourself. But that self is in the process of becoming. That's what drives you. That vision of what you will become. Okay, so I have to end it here. And God willing, we'll continue next time. And we'll see how this process drives innovation. How will creates mind. How will creates all the innovations of our intellect are a result of the will being uncovered and faith becoming something that is in reality, being. Okay. So I have to end, I'm sorry, and I don't have time for questions. Thank if there you. Are. Maybe next time. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.